all human beings equally. So we are all equal in that way, that this love, because it says even the wicked, you see, he longs for the wicked to stop being wicked and come to him and be forgiven, because it's like a debt being forgiven. And he digs getting that love from somebody that's really been forgiven a lot, when they understand how wicked they live their life and debauchery and sin and all this stuff. And so when they come to him, it's a beautiful thing. Say, heaven rejoices more over one sinner that repents than 99 righteous people that didn't need to. Well, you understand. I mean, that God he's up here and we're down here. We're always striving to be more like him. That's not to say that God doesn't learn from us too. He can do whatever he wants to do. And if he wants to learn from us, he can do that. He says, look, I mean, this is what I believe, and this is like Jesus said. I mean, adultery is wrong, and lust is wrong, and all this. And but we could say, well, what about King Solomon? He had how many concubines? I mean, what about King David, who was after God's own heart? And he watched. I guess they used to bathe right out in the open. He watched as Bathsheba took a bath. Here's the king of Israel, peering through the window, watching her and lusting after this Uriah the Hittite. It was actually, she was married. Bathsheba was married. That's the way the story goes. And so I guess the king invited her up to his palace, and they had an affair. And King David was ashamed, but he wove this tangled web to deceive, and so he had to he felt compelled to send Uriah the Hittite to the front lines of this battle that was going on, which almost would assure that he was killed in the heat of battle, and sure enough he was. And this horrible sin, this malice aforethought that had taken place really cut King David's soul to the quick. So, that's when adultery is really gone askew. But Jesus said, look, you'd be better off, don't, look at this person this way or that. It'd be better off to cut your hand off than to lust and all this. But it is also written, he said, that, look, a man that leaves his wife for reasons that are not right in the sight of God, because really we're not supposed to ever have that option. When you get married, it's a death do you part kind of thing, holy matrimony. It comes from the Bible. I mean, this is the whole idea, is that the two become one. They're joined together. This is from the Bible. So they are no longer separate, but they are one entity. They're whole. And that's the only time it's right to have sexual relations at all. At all. I mean, not with a prostitute, not by yourself. I mean, you can't help a nocturnal emission, I suppose, but other than that, basically Jesus said, look, it's not right, and it's best that you don't do this, and you'd be better to cut your hand off than engage in this. Let's remember, Jesus was only half mortal. His Father was divine. It was not a flesh and blood biological dad that Jesus had. So, I mean, in a way, God has to kind of learn through Jesus too. I mean, Jesus is like, he's been called the intercessor, so he's an intermediary, like a lawyer, an attorney, a counselor. That's what Jesus becomes. He argues our case, and we have to argue our own cases. So it's written that, if a wife or husband leaves you for any reason that's not proper in the sight of God, basically that's anything. We're never supposed to leave our spouses. Then you cause them to commit adultery. So it's like a loophole. It's escape. Not that you want that loophole, because who wants to be a sinner? Adultery and lust and all this stuff is sin, and it is always a blight on the soul. It doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel right, and it's spelled out in Scripture. The only right way to have it is with a husband and a wife joined together as one. But that leaves a whole lot of single people out of that perfect state. But what can you do? All you can do is, as individuals, strive to find it, and you never give up. You don't just succumb and say, oh, well, I'm destined to be single the rest of my life, because you never know what's in store for you. If we walk with the Lord, I mean, he might have great things for people that never imagined they would ever fall in love again. And it's tough. I know it's tough. I mean, look at all the great people in the world that have had really hard times with broken relationships. Look what happened to Elvis Presley, how he went downhill in short order after losing, what was her name, Lisa Presley. But, I'm just saying that sin is serious business, and we all have to work out our own forgiveness, salvation with fear and trembling, like it's written. We need to turn to God for the compassion, the mercy, and the understanding that we need. And we do need it. And we need to understand ourselves. We need to understand that we live in a very corrupt world, full of evil, full of debauchery. It really is a satanic realm. At the end of the day, the spirit of Satan, the devil, is in the details of this world. And all these establishmentarians, there's two types. There's those that serve wittingly. Those are the people that unnerve me. Those are the people that make me nuts, okay? And then those are those that are unwitting. That they don't know that they're evil. They don't know that they've been deceived, that they've been duped, that they've been taken. But just like lemmings, they go along to get along. They see it as a path of least resistance. They're going with the flow, going with the grain. But as we all know, when you put your hand across a grain of the wood, it's much more dangerous than if you run it perpendicular to the wood, because if you're running your hand along with the grain, the likelihood of getting a sliver, a splinter, is very great. As anybody that's ever had a bad splinter, and I've had some whoppers. I used to help my dad build sailboats, and I had one that jammed right up the corner of my thumbnail once, almost to the base. It was a huge one. But, over time it worked out. I think it took over a year or something for the thing to come out, but it's when I was about 14, I guess. But the point is that that's what happens. I mean, they're going with the flow, they're going with the grain, and they're going to get snared. And so it's my duty as just a decent, upright human being, a brother to humanity, okay, not just a brother to all Americans, but to humanity at large, is to warn people for two reasons. One, I don't want their blood on my hands or on my head. And the other one is because as a friend of God, I have a compulsion. I have an obligation, a duty, responsibility to show others the error of their ways. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to offend them and they're going to put up a false wall of pride, false pride, a wall of defense for their false pride, okay, because that's what it is. Pride is the kind of term I like to use very sparingly, because really, when I describe pride, for me in my life, if I say I'm very proud of my daughters, I wouldn't say it. I'd say I'm very glad. It makes my heart glad that they are this way or that way, okay? Or somebody else, you're proud of, I'm proud of Trump. He did something. I'm not really proud. It's not pride like, a negative thing. I just see pride as a kind of term that should be used very sparingly. I think, it makes me happy. It makes me glad is a better way to phrase the kind of feeling that I have when somebody does something that I believe is honorable, right, and deserving of commendation and the accolades that follow. I feel like I'm all over the place here with this speech today, but I guess the gist of it is I'm trying to come up with a theme for this set of videos today, and maybe the best thing I can do is just get into some of these current events from this past week. But I did want to put down, wanted to apologize, and just look, I'm a really nice guy. I don't like the idea that I come off as passive aggressive, two-faced, schizophrenic, hypocritical, inconsistent, but I know I do. So I'm kind of, even people that are honest, they'll say, look, like Alex Jones, and he was talking with Zimmerman recently, and they're talking about how they hate certain people, like the New World Order cabal, this bunch of people, the hypocrites, the liars, and the deceivers, and these are the same people Jesus went off on all the time. He was constantly berating them and just just railing these people, dragging them across the coals for their hypocrisy. He couldn't stand it. He knew they hated him because they were pro-establishment, and the establishment was riddled with corruption even back then. And it all had to do with this love of money. Jesus saw right through their duplicity. They're a bunch of liars. They just love their places in the temple and their positions in society, their authority, their pseudo, false, illegitimate authority they had over people. So Jesus knew them, and so I understand when people say I hate, because he even got Michael Zimmerman to admit, I hate these people, but it's like with some coaxing. But people don't like to say that when they know the Bible and they know Jesus said, look, if you hate your fellow man, this was, in the sight of God, this was akin to being a murderer. This is what I mean about the state of your heart, how important it is to keep it pure. Now, I'm not sitting here on a high horse, virtue signaling. I'm preaching to the choir. Because although I'm going to sit here and claim that I'm a pacifist, you've got to hear me say how I feel like breaking somebody's neck sometimes. But I wouldn't. Okay, it'd suffice to have a come to Jesus meeting with somebody and talk to them with the Spirit of God giving me the words to say to that person. But calling them out on their stuff and getting them to just kind of melt from the truth and say, yeah, all right, you're right, and and change them in a profound, fundamental way. And it can be done if we're convincing. If God is successful, okay, working through us, great. That's to much avail, much profit, all the way around. But if we fail, we fail. We have to leave it at that. We can't throw our pearls before swine and beat our heads against the wall. And that's what it would be if I took it further, if I suggest that I'm going to use violence, because I'm not. I'm more than just a wannabe pacifist, but I struggle. I do struggle because there's that militant soldier in every man, that protector, that defender of the innocents, that I want to get in there, and it really bothers me. Deception really bothers me. When I really believe somebody's deceiving, that they know right from wrong on this particular matter. I'm not talking about all those other sundry matters I was discussing earlier where there's gray areas. It's subjective, it's relative, there's wiggle room in there because of your beliefs and how you've been brought up and your perspective, your perception, and all that kind of stuff. I'm talking about cut and dried mathematical stuff where honesty is the only requirement. Okay, that's what makes me nuts. Okay, that's what I find insufferable, unnerving, untenable. I cannot handle it, and that makes me nuts. Okay, those kind of people. But I mean, if they really believe what they believe it. I mean, I've read some snippets from Marxism, for example, and a lot of that sounds egalitarian. So I can totally understand how so many communists in the world, so many socialists in the world, really believe what they believe. They believe they're on the right side of history, no matter how few people believe it. But they won't look at all the examples where communism keeps failing and falling. They won't, let's talk about Russia. Let's talk about what's going on in China. Everybody's going the other direction. They're going toward prosperity, which is what capitalism really should be and would bring if we had true capitalism, but we don't have it. So I can understand the frustration from the communists, in all honesty. And if they're real, they're real. They really believe it. I mean, that's worthy of respect. They will fight and die. Do you understand? And kill people because of their beliefs, if they believe it enough. So we've got to be very careful in America at this point in history that we don't get it entangled in some civil war beyond what's already been going on. Alex Jones had Matt Bracken on the show recently, and they were talking. He thinks it's inevitable we're going to have a civil war, and I disputed that. But in retrospect, I had to take it back and say, look, maybe they're right. But I think the war started in 1963 with the assassination of JFK. I believe that was a money printer's coup d'etat because the most powerful thing in the world, he was getting rid of the Federal Reserve. We were going to nationalize the currency. He was already circulating these silver notes, effectively supplanting the Federal Reserve notes. And it was a big, big step in the wrong direction. And the media never talks about that. Oh, well, I guess his ideas died with him because the Federal Reserve is, established is solidified and cemented more than ever before. So no talk about abolishing the Federal Reserve anymore. These evildoers have been fighting against. These are domestic enemies we're talking about, though. That's civil war. That's what's going on here. This New World Order cabal and all these establishmentarians that are witting of what they're doing. They know they're deceivers. They know they're liars and cheaters and thieves, and they're willing to murder. They're willing to commit mass murder, start these dubious wars for profit and control to keep their position in place, just to do what the puppeteers above them want in this pyramid of